Hello, good morning. It is Hannah Crum here. We are going to be going live in just a few minutes. Today I have a very special guest I'm excited to bring on with me. Shanti from Shanti Elixirs in North Carolina will be joining us. So hello, good morning everybody. Let's see, wave. I'm wearing my contacts, but I'm at that age where I also need a little help, so. Hello, good morning, Nasala, Fermentation Association, Veggie Queen. Good to see you. Hello, good morning, everybody. All about Jun. Jun tea is a cousin of kombucha, and I'm excited to have Shanti here because she has a Jun brewing business based in North Carolina, and she is going to be sharing some of what she does as a producer and selling it at the stores. We, of course, here at Kombucha Kamp, we're bacteria farmers. We sell kits and cultures, so of course we've got your Jun cultures here for you, all packaged and ready to go. And let's see. I'm going to get Shanti in here, so 1 second. There we go. Welcome. Shanti will be joining us in just a minute, but how many of you are loving that Jun tea? Hi.
Hey there, can you see me?
I can see you.
Okay. Well, good to see you, Hannah.
Good to see you. Welcome. Yeah, so glad to have you here on this lovely Monday. We just had an exciting earthquake this morning. That was fun. Just a small one.
Oh my goodness.
That got me out of bed a little bit earlier than usual. How are things for you in North Carolina?
Good. They've been a little chilly lately, but it looks like today's going to warm up to maybe 70. So looking forward to that.
That's great. Yeah, well, so first of all, I just wanted to share with people that Shanti and I have known each other for a little while now. Why don't you share just a little bit about who you are and how you got into making Jun for us, Shanti?
Okay, sounds good. First, I want to say, yes, Hannah, you have been such an amazing resource for me on this journey. I am a nurse and still working as a nurse and currently a lactation consultant. And it was around 2015 where I decided I wanted to become a beekeeper. And so I became a beekeeper, and what happened was I found myself at a sacred beekeeping workshop in, I think it was September of 2016. And at that sacred beekeeping workshop, I was introduced to Jun for the first time. So I actually was on a candida diet at the time and declined my first offer. And Rebecca Robertson was like, no, you need this. If you have an overabundance, this will help balance your system out. So she convinced me to try it, and I fell in love. That first taste was amazing. And I know it was kind of similar to your first taste of kombucha, that aha, oh my gosh, my body's been wanting this and craving this. And so fortunately, Rebecca Robertson at the end of the workshop asked if I wanted to stay and learn how to brew Jun. And of course, I took her up on the opportunity. And so it was September of 2016 when I first started brewing.
Oh, great. So you've been doing it for about 5 years now then?
Yes.
And well, what an amazing background. So obviously you care about health and wellness. And how is the apiary coming along? Are you still keeping the bees?
So what happened was really our Jun company, the business took off. I wasn't planning on going into business, but people couldn't get enough of the Jun. I took it to festivals, and I took it to work, and people just wanted more. So at first I used honey from our apiary, our Blissful Bee apiary, but very quickly had to rely on some local beekeepers. So I'm currently using a local beekeeper for our honey. And unfortunately, my hive was attacked by bears. And so I don't actually have an apiary going right now. But the future plan is to, when I have a little bit more time on my hands, to get back into the beekeeping, because it was really the honeybees that made me fall in love with this whole process of Jun brewing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, honeybees are just so amazing, and it's great that we've had this chance to learn more about bees and how valuable they are to our ecosystem, because I think, you know, there's a lot of fear around bees and getting stung by bees, and I know that I've sort of shifted my thought process around them. I read a really amazing book, like The Sacred Path of the Bee or something, but it was really fascinating. It was about a guy who basically talked about being a bee shaman
Yeah.
and sort of the process he went through in England. Have you read this book?
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yes. It
Yeah.
was so powerful, and it's just so amazing, this ancient relationship that we have with nature, with the birds and the bees, literally, and how vital it is to our life here on the planet, even now in this modern 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, your story is so common. So many people fall in love with fermentation, fall in love with kombucha, fall in love with Jun, love the way it makes them feel. I'm going to ask you in a minute how it helped with your candida, but fall in love with how it makes them feel, and then they just feel inspired to share it with their community. So I love hearing your story matches up with that one as well. And how did you find, did it, obviously we know candida overgrowth can be inspired by too much sugar and things like that. How did you find the fermented Jun in terms of managing with it?
Yeah, it's amazing. Honey is actually an amazing product, and Jun being fermented really had a huge impact on my health. And I found that it took a few months, but that I had no more issues with candida, and I was able to just, I found that honey and the fermented beverage Jun really made me crave things that were just more holistic and more natural, whole fruits rather than sugary treats and things like that. And I think that's a common experience that a lot of people have when they start to add fermented foods to their diet. They realize that their diet was really lacking, and they were going to, to the easy processed foods because short term that seemed to fill the craving. And so I was naturally just able to release a lot of sugary products.
You know, and this is the irony of making kombucha and Jun, because we use a sugar source, right? We're fermenting that with our culture. And so you think, oh, well, you're using all this sugar, this must be so bad for you. And, you know, this is a really unfortunate thing. And I don't know if this is true for Jun or not, but at least like if you're looking at a bottle of kombucha or Jun and you're looking at the sugar grams, it has to say added sugars, even though we're not adding sugar after the fermentation process. But because we use it as our primary fermentation source, that is where we're required to put that information. I think that confuses a lot of people, because when they look at a bottle of kombucha or Jun and they look at the sugar grams and they think, oh my gosh, it has all this sugar. Well, the reality is that, first of all, those are not apple to apple comparisons. If you're looking at a can of soda or something like that, because our sugars are already fermented, they're already broken down into a format that's easier for your body to absorb and does not have the same glycemic impact. And so really when you're looking at these different types of beverages, you have to be that educated consumer, because if you go into it comparing just the back of the label, you might not be clear as to what it is you're looking at. But you know, I love that fermented foods help support your health journey.
Yeah, very exciting. And it's not only my journey, but when we started, so I started fermenting in September of 2016, and then very quickly 2017 started going to farmers markets. And this was really awesome because it was a great place to let people try it and to educate folks, and then to have folks come back week after week to share their journey and their healing journey. And I can't even count on my fingers how many people have stopped taking medications because of Jun, and have stopped, feeling sort of like digestive system issues that they had. I know folks who had candida issues, and those are resolved. And so I know that you've also heard lots of amazing reports, but it was really affirming when I was just starting out in business to get like weekly updates on how it was affecting others.
That feedback is a huge part of why people do this. And I'm seeing some questions here. They're asking how we spell this. So we're talking all about Jun, which rhymes with fun. You might also know it as Jun or Jun. In Chinese, I believe it's pronounced Jun, which is the Chinese word for bacteria. And it's spelled J-U-N. So this is a cousin of kombucha. That's how we think of it, in that it's a fermented beverage. We use a culture that looks very similar to a kombucha culture. The primary difference being that it feeds on raw honey. And so why don't we dive into some of the questions? I love hearing your story, and of course we'll hear more about it as we go through this, because I think a lot of people, they have this very profound experience with these products. And it's not to say that kombucha or Jun or all fermented foods is a cure-all. That's absolutely not it, but it starts to change that internal chemistry, and then you naturally make different changes in your life as a result of that chemistry changing. So, you know, I always think of it as a gateway. It's a gateway into better choices in life, and, you know, we're not here to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination, good, better, best, and so whenever we can choose a better choice, and then from there a best choice, that's going to be awesome. Yeah, the title of the book, you guys, it's escaping my mind. Do you remember what it's called, Shanti? It's not Secret Life of Bees, because that's the documentary.
I think I have it on my bookshelf somewhere.
I have it at home on my bookshelf too, so we might have to look that book up, and we'll share that with folks. But, you know, Tori Amos was inspired by reading that book. She had a whole album that was sort of inspired by it as well, the Secret Life of Honeybees or something. Everything's a secret life. So, but in any case, we have some really great questions here. And the first one, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is what's the origin of the Jun culture?
Yes, so the origin of the Jun culture is steeped in mysticism. We believe that it came from Tibet. There's not a lot of information out there. It was believed to have been sort of a secret brew that, you know, the monks and the warriors were having access to, that brought them energy and enlightenment. And somehow this Jun culture was smuggled out of Tibet and you know, into the United States. And we have an interesting little twist on the story. Rob Lefinski of Mandala Chocolates, he and I met at a yoga festival, and he introduced himself to me as one of the folks who was able to distribute Jun throughout the United States and other places in the world. And we were able to trace back our Jun lineage to him. So anyway, that's our story. I got my Jun culture from Rebecca Robertson, the beekeeper, and she got hers when she went to the Holistic Women's Conference. And so we think we were able to trace it back to these guys that were out west. And one person wanted to keep it secret, and the other person wanted to share the wealth with the world. And so there's very little known about it, but that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm happy to hear. I would love to hear your story too. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's funny because I've definitely heard the Tibet story, and I have tried through various means, as some of you might remember, that I study Mandarin Chinese and Spanish. I love languages. And so where I went was I tried to find dictionaries, Tibetan dictionaries that talked about fermenting honey, and I really did not find any terminology there. But again, that's not an in-depth study. I don't speak Tibetan. This was just sort of a cursory glance that I went to. That said, I mean, who knows where anything came from, right? So I'm not against a really good story. You know, we have sort of the mythology of where kombucha started in 221 BC, and that created a whole World Kombucha Day out of that. So I'm not opposed to any good stories. In fact, upon revisiting, I have a story on my blog called "The Secret of the Sea Treasure" that was provided to me when I made contact with someone in China. So it was a story provided to me in Chinese. I translated it. And when I went back and read it a little while ago, I noticed that in fact it was in a pot of wine that had honey added to it. So who knows if in fact that legend of the sea treasure was not harkening back to a Jun culture potentially. So Again, these origins are always shrouded in mystery, but the reality is they're here today. We can have them in our hands. And I did find the book title, The Shamanic Way of the Bee.
Yep.
It was going to drive me nuts if I didn't find it, but I went and looked it up. The Shamanic Way of the Bee, that was the one I was referencing. You know, and so I really do think it is the organisms present in the raw honey that sets the Jun culture apart from a kombucha, because we know that we can use pasteurized honey as a sugar source with a kombucha culture. At least when I was, you know, as bacteria farmers, part of what we do is, you know, we'll collect cultures from many places, we'll cultivate them, we might hybridize them. And when we were working on establishing our Jun farm, we really noticed that if we did sugar with the Jun and raw honey with the kombucha, they both died like instantly. They were not happy with each other's sugar source. Now, again, these are flexible technologies, and we know people like to experiment. And so can you adapt one to the other? Potentially. You just want to experiment and play around with that. But I really do think it is the organisms present in the raw honey that gives it its unique profile. And so one of the questions that somebody was asking is, why does Jun ferment faster than kombucha? And this took a little digging and a little meditation, but what I figured out was, in kombucha, the yeast need to cut the sugar from sucrose, which is a disaccharide, into glucose and fructose before the bacteria can start to absorb those smaller nutrients. Honey, raw honey, has fructose, glucose, and sucrose. So they don't have to wait. They can immediately start consuming those sugars and converting them into the healthy acids. And so that's one reason I think it has that shorter fermentation time. I also think on a certain level, it's like honey's a little more concentrated, it's a little sweeter, and I feel like it sours more quickly as a result. And so with Jun, I find we can do a slightly cooler temp, and you'll tell me what your temps you like to brew in, but a slightly cooler temp and a shorter fermentation time, and you get this beautiful, lovely flavor. So where do you ferment your Jun out?
Yeah, so our Jun is fermented typically in a temperature, in a room with a temperature of 74 degrees. We find that works really well for us. And we ferment for a week. We could ferment and we could ferment shorter, but we find that the pH really drops to, we like it to be under 3. And so it goes in under by a week. And, you know, if we were to ferment a little bit longer, we probably would have a more acidic type flavor, but we really like what it does at a week.
Yeah. I mean, and of course, all these ferments are to taste. So the longer you ferment them, the more tangy they are. The shorter we ferment them, the less, the more sweetness they still have. Do you ever make Jun vinegar?
I have done that before, but we don't do it commercially. Yeah.
Yeah. But I bet it would be tasty. So another question is, why only green tea? And I would say, well, it isn't only green tea. You know, with kombucha, it was traditionally considered a black tea sugar ferment, right? But we know we can use a wide variety of teas and even non-tea plant herbs, yerba mate, ginger, different things to ferment the culture with. So I always say it's flexible. Why do you use green tea? Do you use white tea? What's your tea choice?
We use a combination of 3 different types of green tea, and I have experimented with other teas, but I really like the flavor of the green tea. I tell folks when they are starting out with brewing to always start with what the culture do before they start experimenting, and slowly cut it down and make sure that they have several SCOBYs on hand before they start experimenting, because you really can experiment. But I like the flavor of the green teas, and we use 2 women local based companies. We source their tea from them, so that's really nice too.
That's great. Yeah, and I agree. You know, we use a blend of green teas. Our Green Goddess tea blend is what we do with our Jun culture. It's really fantastic. It tastes great. And in fact, that's what we use in our farm. So the cultures are very adapted to it. So I do recommend, so when you buy a Jun culture from us, we're always going to include a free sample of our tea, just so that way you get a chance to try it as is. But once you see it's reproducing and you're getting quality beverage from there, go ahead and experiment. Some people like the white tea. And I think the reason the lighter teas are preferred is just it has such a nice interplay with the floral notes of the honey But that said, feel free to experiment. There's a lot of fun things we can do, not just in the secondary with the flavoring phase, but in primary. But to your point, Shanti, we definitely want to make sure we have extra cultures in our hotel, just in case we accidentally kill them. we have a repository we can go back to. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good one. I think let's see some of these other questions here. Why does it ferment faster? So people are asking, are kombucha and JUN SCOBYs really so different? And I think I mentioned one way in that they're different. And can you use a kombucha SCOBY to start a batch of JUN? As we discussed, sort of, you can gradually shift one over time. And so how much honey would we use for a gallon of JUN? I use the 1 cup per gallon ratio. Is that similar to what you're doing, Shanti?
Yes, it is. And I also wanted to just jump back. I do know folks who've tried to train their kombucha SCOBYs and their JUN SCOBY. And what I've heard is that the SCOBY life shortens and it can potential mold. And so you can try to train, but it just might not last as long. So again, like make sure you have extra SCOBYs on hand when you're experimenting for sure. But yeah, we use that classic 1 cup of honey for a gallon. Mm-hmm.
And then what kind of flavors are you doing? Are you adding fruit juices in second? Do you do flowers? What's sort of your philosophy there?
Yeah, we do a little bit of everything, and really anything works. So one of our popular flavors is a Tulsi Rose hibiscus blend. And so we just steep a tea, make a nice flavored strengthened tea, and we add that to our finished product, and it tastes wonderful. And with the lighter flavors, the honey notes shine through a little bit more. So it's super fun to experiment. We also have an amazing savory blend. So take root fire and take a fire cider recipe and add it to, and you end up with this amazing savory blend. We've also done vegetables and fruit juices. So really anything works.
Yeah. Well, I'm just reading okay, sorry, I can't read tiny words. Let's see. Miss Simple Life is talking about how she's drinking your kudzu dandelion flavor. So kudzu is like a vine that grows like crazy in the South and is kind of an invasive plant. How awesome that you're taking that and using it for a food purpose.
Yes, we have an amazing group called Kudzu Culture here in Asheville, and they harvest the kudzu root juice for us. And then all we have to do is add the kudzu root juice to the JUN, and you end up with a wonderful liver tonic. It's our spring liver tonic flavor. Mm-hmm.
And what does kudzu juice taste like?
Oh, it's very earthy in taste. I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorites. Yeah, earthy is how I would describe it.
Yeah, so kind of like a turmeric or a burdock, or just any of those roots are going to have that earthy flavor. And like you said, so this is what's so great about our fermented foods and drinks is they become carriers for medicinal properties of other herbs. And so the more we study the plants, the more we understand how they support our bodies in different ways. And this is why, this is really the unfortunate thing that happens with the sort of one magic bullet mentality that we've been trained to sort of seek out is, we're like, well, what's the one pill or what's the one thing? And the reality is your body doesn't want one thing. It needs a wide variety of things. This is why plants are only in season at certain times of the year, because that's when they support our body the most. And so when we rotate those flavors, when we experiment with our herbs, when we try a lot of different things, that's when your body's going to get the most diverse range of nutrients, bioflavonoids, and all the other entourage effects that we haven't even been able to figure out how to understand. And so it's really important that we're using herbs and flowers and fruits and things holistically, because that's just going to not only taste good, but give us those great benefits as well. All right, so one person's asking, Nerve Factory, how do you control the spread of aggressive JUN bacteria and yeast?
So I'm wondering, is the question related to brewing more than one thing, like brewing more than one type of thing or cultivating more than one type of thing? Because if it is, it's important to have separation. I've had many folks who've tried to brew kombucha alongside Jun because they were already brewing kombucha, and then they wanted to experiment with Jun, and they had their brews too close together and they cross-contaminated and both grew mold. So I'm not sure if that is the question, but there are also ways to, help the yeast. I find tends to take over. So we just check our cultures on a regular basis, and if it looks like they're just really in overabundance of yeast, then we go ahead and start to separate that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing many people forget about is, yes, it's a symbiosis. And yes, that means the yeast and bacteria work together, but they forget we are the stewards of that balance, which means we are in control of helping which aspect of those are flourishing. And what I learned early on was that the yeast are prolific. They're kind of like everywhere. There's wild yeast everywhere. There's pollen, right? Like they're just floating around the environment. And so what I want to be nurturing though is the bacteria, because the bacteria is going to help hold them in balance. And so same with kombucha, we're always taking 1 cup of starter liquid right off the top where it's most bacteria rich. And on your pellicle, on your culture, of course, there's going to be yeast strands as well. And so we don't necessarily have to add more yeast strands. So if you use the bottom dregs, that very quickly throws your brew out of balance. You get these funky flavors. And hey, if anyone watching has more questions, please drop those in the chat. Shanti and I are going to keep going through these questions and talking about Jun. We'd love to make sure we get your questions answered as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I first started, I remember it was around November of 2017 when I found out about you and ended up getting one of your wonderful oak continuous brew barrels. And so I experimented with continuous brew alongside doing batch brew. And I found it was much more challenging for me to keep the balance of the bacteria and yeast when I was doing a continuous brew. Now it was definitely possible, but it took a little bit more, time and energy. So I actually switched over to batch brew, and that's what we currently do because it's easier for us to kind of monitor how things are going, especially now because we brew in glass, so we can really, check in on our cultures and see how they're doing.
Yeah, I think most commercial producers do end up in a batch brew process. Some might use continuous brew, like for starter liquid or things like that, but typically the beverage you're drinking is going to be a batch brew. But a lot of folks also blend batches. Pardon my tongue twister there, but that's a great way to get a consistent flavor profile from a commercial perspective. And blending is something they do in all kinds of industries, wine and beer, and it's just about getting consistent product. Tea, even tea leaves, like English breakfast is a blend of all different kinds of tea, and if they're out of one kind, they'll substitute another, and you won't even know the difference because the blend is so good at masking that. So blending is really great as well. What I've noticed, my Jun and Kombucha aren't too far apart from each other in the kitchen, but I think because they're both well tended, I haven't seen any sort of cross-contamination. Now, where I do end up seeing cross-contamination is if you're brewing water kefir at home next to a kombucha or a Jun, you might find a SCOBY growing in your water kefir, especially if you neglect them. So our organisms are very dominant, they're very active, and so you definitely want to keep the water kefir and probably the other ferments away from them. But I feel like the Jun and Kombucha, they don't do too much, at least in my environment. It could be when you're in a more closed environment that those organisms don't play as nice. So here's a question that, of course, is on everybody's mind. Is it easy to keep Jun Kombucha's ABV below 0.5%? What's the best way to do that?
So when I was experimenting early on, I found that what you flavor second ferment with plays a huge role in, the alcohol levels. And so the more sugars, the higher the sugars of your flavoring, the higher the alcohol level. A lot of commercial companies won't second ferment. They will actually add flavors and do something called forced carbonation to help keep the alcohol levels down. So there's lots of different ways to keep the alcohol levels down. But what we found is if we second fermented for no longer than 2 days, and we didn't put a large amount, so no more than 2 to 3 ounces per 16-ounce growler, that we were able to keep those alcohol levels down.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about that fermentation, because the alcohol curve in both kombucha and Jun is a bell. So that means that it goes up early, but then it comes back down because the alcohol, which is a preservative, so it's not intoxicating, it's there to prevent mold and other things from growing in there. That's how smart nature is. Nature is really good at figuring those things out. It will then come back down. But if you reintroduce a fermentable sugar, that's just going to cause that process to start all over again. Now, making it at home, this isn't typically an issue because you're not selling it to anybody. So obviously, once you start to go commercial, these are things you have to think about. And we're also working on the Kombucha Act, which will help to raise the tax level from 0.5% to 1.25%, because first of all, those laws were written at a time when there was no commercially available Jun or kombucha, and they came out of prohibition, a time that was incredibly, as the word suggests, prohibitive about alcohol and wasn't really rooted in Mother Nature or a sort of more holistic understanding of these products. And so we're actively together, we're both in KBI, we're actively advocating that senators and congressmen sign on to our bill and help get it passed. So you at home can do this too. If you go to kombuchabrewers.org/lobbying, you'll see there's a petition that you can send to your local representative and say, hey guys, we want you to help support this industry. We love these products. We want to make sure they're able to get these products to us in a way that we don't have to feel under the gun or like we're out of compliance, when in fact our products are very safe and they're not intoxicating. And we list on the label that there is alcohol in them. So if you're avoiding alcohol for any reason, you can see that right on the label and you'll know not to consume those beverages, because that is a personal choice after all. Well, now I want to sort of shift the conversation a little bit to your business. You are a woman-owned business. What have some of your challenges been getting started off the ground?
Oh boy, that's a big question. So I would say cash flow has been the biggest issue all along. We have an amazing product, people love it, but it's hard to keep the margins where we need them to be, because it's really important to me to source locally whenever possible. It's really important to us as a company to collaborate with other local companies whenever possible. And so what that means is our costs are going to be high, and the cost of honey is high. And so everything we do, everything we put into our product is high cost. And so to convince others, and it's even higher to, it's more costly to make kombucha. So to convince others that this is a product worth purchasing and selling is probably one of the biggest challenges. However, when people taste it, of course, they fall in love with it, and then we're good to go. But I would say that's probably the biggest thing, is that we're working so hard to share the Jun love with folks. We had to do a lot of education about kombucha because there were still so few people who even knew about that. And then of course, Jun is even less recognized. So just, really getting out there and sharing, information about these ferments. That's of course the fun part though. So I wouldn't say that was so challenging. It's just interesting to bring a product into, an area that most people aren't familiar with it and aren't familiar with the benefits, and how to articulate all that in just a few words has been challenging.
That is the challenge, and I think you're right. Again, our society has trained us to look for the lowest cost option as being the best value, when that's not actually true, right? Usually the best value is what actually makes your body healthier as opposed to depletes you. And those things can cost a little bit more because, like you're saying, this is a product that has higher cost inputs, right? Raw honey isn't something that most people have access to. And that's why when people call me up and they say, oh, should I do kombucha or Jun? I lay it out very clearly. I say, well, sugar is a less expensive product, so that's going to be easier. But if you have access to a raw honey, or if for whatever reason you're just avoiding sugar and you want to do raw honey, that's a really great choice then for you. But I also see that, you know, anyone who's brewing kombucha at home but wants to make that special batch of Jun every once in a while, it's great to have a culture handy, even if you hotel it from time to time. You're going to just love having that dynamic difference in flavor profiles. But you're absolutely right. I think it's how do we retrain ourselves to understand that when I'm paying more for a premium product, it's not just because, you know, it tastes better, but it's because it actually is creating a benefit in my body that's really valuable. And so, you know, when you're used to buying sodas or energy drinks, it can feel challenging that cost proposition. But you're absolutely right. And I think though that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I do feel like it is a business where you can sustain a family, you can serve your community, and because you're getting all that great feedback, there is, like, you get paid in more than just the financial aspect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, it as you've said before, it's certainly an act of love. You know, we love what we do. We put a lot of love, peace, and good vibes into everything we do. We love sharing with the community, and we'll be able to be more profitable in the future as we get the word out about our product. And, you know, as we see, we have, you know, customers coming back again and again and again because they love the way it makes them feel. And one thing I do want to mention about Jun is that it's prebiotic and probiotic because of the raw honey. So raw honey has so many wonderful, you know, it's got enzymes and it's got proteins and it's got vitamins and it's got minerals, but it's also allows for our product prebiotic and probiotic, which really helps with the digestive piece. So we've just had testimonials where people are like, this is really feeling good to me and my body. My, you know, my microbiome is much happier now. So
Absolutely. And I think, you know, there's a lot to be said for that. And obviously, we've been going through a really challenging time together with this pandemic. How have you been able to weather that storm as a small business?
well, you know, we decided to stay in business. We decided to keep our employees. I've got 12 employees, mostly part-time, but, you know, they were very gracious and were able to decrease their hours when we needed to do that. And you know, we just have a beautiful hive, so to speak. So the support and love that we've gotten from our community has been huge. Here in the Asheville area, we lost like 90% of our accounts because we were mostly selling to restaurants and breweries and stuff. And so that was definitely challenging. We had to do a little pivoting. So we now actually have e-commerce and we do sell online. We also started with some grocery stores. I wasn't thinking to go that route, but now we're in a lot of health food stores and co-ops that stayed open during the pandemic, and that really made a difference. And, you know, farmers markets are starting back. Of course, we can't demo, which is tricky. You know, not being able to provide samples has been a huge hit for us because, you know, that was a huge way for us to get information across and to sell our product. But we're feeling the spring energy out here. I mean, people are super excited, and we're getting more and more accounts, and it looks like things are really moving in the right direction.
So do you have any advice for any folks who might be wanting to dip their toe into Jun brewing, be that a home brewer or from a commercial perspective?
It's actually quite easy to do. So I would say just dive in and reach out to you for support or reach out to us for support. You know, find some support folks, because I find that in the beginning, there's lots and lots of questions that people have. And oftentimes, you know, folks are concerned about mold when there's no mold that's there. So, you know, just, you know, the first few times that you do it, definitely seek help. And, you know, again, Hannah, you've been such a huge support to us. I mean, just, I remember it was like a couple weeks before the international, you know, brewing conference in 2017, where I'd called you up to ask you a question, and you were like, it's a shame you can't come out to the, you know, our conference. And I was like, what, a kombucha conference? And so I was able to magically figure out how to get out there. And so, you know, I flew out to California, and let me tell you, this conference was absolutely incredible. And there were so many wonderful resources, and KBI has amazing resources out there, but it wasn't just the speeches and the classes and the workshops that you had going on out there. It was also connecting with other brewers, and just to be able to connect with them. I'm still friends with the Updog girls that I met out there, and they were a huge resource to me, as was, you know, I'm trying to Cape Cod Kombucha gals that I had met out there. So like, connect with other brewers and ask lots of questions as you're going along. And there's so many wonderful resources online now. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So kombuchabrewers.org and Kombucha Con is, we've been sad not to meet in person. Obviously, with the pandemic, we've pivoted to online ourselves. Last year, we did a virtual Kombucha Con in September. This year, we're doing some virtual vendor showcases in the summer and the fall. But Kombucha Con in person is coming back 2022, March 29th through April 1st. You have to be there. You're going to love it. Anyone here who's thinking about diving into the industry, really, you're going to find your tribe. You're going to find your people. We have this massive sampling bar, hopefully next spring, that'll still be viable. But we've got, you know, just wonderful workshops. And to Shanti's point, just great people coming together who really care. And, you know, someone here is asking, do you think branding's an important in this kind of company? I mean, branding's always important, is what I'll just say, because that's how people are going to know who you are. But how did you, obviously your name is Shanti, but that was where your name came from, Shanti Elixirs?
Yeah, so when I first took that sip of Jun, it brought immediate peace and balance to my body. And so yes, Shanti means peace. And so I thought of these elixirs as peace elixirs. So that's why I decided to go with Shanti Elixirs. Now, of course, not everybody knows what Shanti means, so we do end up with a lot of, you know, explaining, but that's good, right? You know, if you pick a brand name and people want to ask you more questions, then you can delve deeper into why you chose that brand. But I come from a meditation and yoga background and a holistic health background. And so I also, you know, is very familiar with the chakra centers, the energy centers of the body. And so a lot of our flavors are related to what effect that they have on the chakra energy system. So for me, it just made a lot of sense. Plus with Shanti Elixirs, you know, there are a lot of magical elixirs out there. I thought, well, that would be a good general name in case I decide to go into Shanti Bucha and, you know, you know, expanding the horizons. But we ended up falling in love with Jun. So
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, so speaking of the honey, are there different types of honey you play with? Like, have you noticed a difference between an orange blossom versus a buckwheat flower? Or I don't know how closely you're tracking your honey types.
Oh yeah, it definitely shines through. You can have a lot of variability in even just one flavor of Jun based on the honey you use, even if you just stick with, you know, wildflower honey. We do stick with wildflower honey because it tends to be the least expensive, but I have brewed multiple times with sourwood honey, and that brings a whole new flavor profile. And so yes, playing with the different types of honey, if you have a local beekeeper in the area, is what I highly recommend you do. It's really fun.
Absolutely. Although I feel like the Manuka honey is so expensive, it's one of those honeys you probably just want to use medicinally and not necessarily make your Jun out of, unless you want a very expensive product. But absolutely, I mean, just like any ingredient is going to have an impact on the flavor profile, of course, the honeys will also impact that as well. And, you know, there's the darker ones, the lighter ones. We get our honey out of Texas is where we're getting ours.
Nice.
These cute little bottles. Yes. And so for any newbies out there who are new to Jun, and again, like we're saying Jun rhymes with fun, but you can say June, you can say Jun. It's just like kefir, kefir, kefir. That's just how we call it. So don't feel like you're saying it wrong if you're doing it differently. That's perfectly fine. But if you need a SCOBY, you need to get started, you need a Jun culture, Kombucha Kamp, we're bacteria farmers. We've got the kits and cultures to get you going. And of course, we encourage you to try any of the local brands that you happen to stumble across, because just like kombucha, there's going to be a variety of different flavor profiles and approaches to the product. And this is actually what I really love about our industry. You know, my husband and I founded Kombucha Brewers International because we wanted to bring everybody who shares this mutual passion for creating products that not only taste delicious, but also have that beneficial effect on others. And I just find that our community is so full of people who care, who are loving, who want to make the world a better place. And I honestly, I encourage anybody who feels the desire to do so to jump on in. So many people need healing. So many people are sick on our planet. Unfortunately, we live in a country that still allows too many toxic chemicals into our food supply, even though those same companies will make those foods without those chemicals, you know, for Europe, for export, for other places. And, you know, that's really sort of morally disgusting that companies are willing to cut corners here in the United States because they can get away with it, not because they have any sort of moral imperative to care for their citizens. So, you know, and that's why we do what we do, because we feel a sense of justice and we want to help people get access to foods that make their lives better. And anybody, anywhere can start a fermentation company and benefit their community. So I highly advocate, if you're feeling that pull, if you're wanting to learn something new, jump in, try it out. So first try it at home, get your kits and supplies, try it at home. And if you find it something that resonates with you, then join us, because we really are a dynamic community of folks. And so I really want to thank you, Shanti, for taking the time to come here to talk about your business. And so where do people find you if people want to learn more about Shanti Elixirs?
ShantiElixirs.com is our website, and we have lots of information on there. We are based out of Asheville. We're just north of Asheville in Weaverville right now. You can find us at farmers markets, and you can find us in over 200 locations, mostly in North Carolina, but we're spreading into the surrounding states. So now you'll find us in South Carolina and Tennessee and Virginia. We're going to stay regional. But yeah, online, and also Instagram and Facebook at Shanti Elixirs. And yeah, that's, you know, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, DM us. It was wonderful speaking with you, Hannah. What an honor. Thank you so much for having me. I just wanted to add one more thing. I remember at that conference, it was a very powerful conference for me. We at one point stood and you know, we held hands together from people from all over the world, and we just felt how connected we were in sharing our love for health and well-being. And it was super, super powerful. So I want to thank you again for all of the amazing work that you're doing and, you know, sharing your love with the world.
Oh, thanks, Shanti. Giant human SCOBY. We can do one right now with our hearts. Let's just imagine that we're connecting with each other, with the world, with the organisms, with everybody who's watching this now and in the future. We got this, people. We can do this. Come on, this is who we are. Organisms desire connection. They desire community. Nothing in the ecosystem lives without relying on every other aspect of its ecosystem. So thank you, everybody, for being here today. Grab your kits at kombuchakamp.com. Check out kombuchabrewers.org. Go find Shanti. Follow her at Shanti Elixirs. And thank you so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate having you here.
Take care. Have a good day.
Bye. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.